And for more on President Trump's tariffs and how the EU is responding, we're going to head to Miami now, where Maxime Larive is standing by. He's a research associate at the European Union Center at the University of Miami. Maxime, great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
Friday, President Trump threatened this 20% tariff of all U.S. imports of EU-assembled cars. This is on top of, as you know, the tariffs on steel and aluminum. What's next in this tit-for-tat between the two?
Well, I think at that point, we are going to see exactly how this is going to evolve. I think we all seen this morning the tweet by President Trump regarding tariffs on cars that could have consequential effect on German automakers and even Japanese and other players. Currently, the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, is investigating this case, and we should see some kind of a result of this investigation in August. Based on that, the expectation would be that if the relationship continued to become a little bit more dire, we could see potentially the implementation of tariffs on cars right before the midterm elections.
So this just adds to an ongoing list of threats and promises by President Trump regarding tariffs. He says he wants to create U.S. jobs and protect interests here in the United States. Does he have a point in saying the U.S. has a significant deficit, and is he going about it the right way?
Well, the president looks at the world, and especially when it comes to economic and trade policy, on a very transactional matter. For him, a success story is a decrease in terms of trade deficit. For him, the way he looks at it, if the U.S. has a surplus in trade, then the U.S. is winning. Well, trade policy is a little bit more complex than that. It's not because a country has a trade deficit that the country is doing poorly. Now, if we look at the recent report that was produced by the Peterson Institute, they look at the implementation of, let's say, a 25% tariff on cars, and this could have a drop on the production by 1.4% and could potentially have impact of roughly 200,000 jobs in the U.S. From a period to 1 to 3 years. So it seems that centers and research centers that are nonpartisan are looking at a greater impact on jobs and the economy in the U.S., in fact.
Even as Trump is vowing to fight for more equal trade, Maxime, the U.S. trade deficit has continued to grow by some estimations. Why is that?
Well, the U.S. is one of the largest consuming markets, and in order to produce specific goods, the production here in the U.S. is quite costly. So simply you buy abroad in order to have cheaper goods. And we see as well, the construction of goods, the manufacturing of goods has become more and more complex. Let's just look at the case, for instance, of smartphones, right, where you have multinational corporations like Apple receiving most of the benefits here in the U.S., but then producing the different segments of that device across the world. And this is the same with auto manufacturers as well. This is not because we have a plant in Germany or in France or even in South Carolina that everything is being built in the country. So looking at trade deficit for that reason is very difficult, considering the globalization of the economy and the supply chain.
Let's talk about Trump and how he goes about this diplomatic process. Some look at him and wonder exactly where he's coming from. He seems to push forward with the tariffs, then he backs off. He's talking about $450 billion of tariffs right now on imports from China. He wants China to strengthen protection on intellectual property and reduce tariffs on U.S. products. But he's also got conflict with Canada and Mexico as he's looking to renegotiate NAFTA.
Yeah, so I think if we look for the U.S. and the Europeans, they look at China and say, look, here China has not always been following the rules implemented by the WTO. But the way the U.S. president is tackling it is most likely in the wrong fashion. In order to address and interact with China and make sure that there is some changes in the behaviors of that specific country, then you need to use your allies and use the platform in place such as the WTO and other multinational platforms. But the way he's doing it is simply doing it alone, and he wants to only interact on bilateral matters. And this is probably going to have negative consequences in the way he can push his agenda and have countries behave the way he would like to. This is not going to work that way for him.
Lastly, I just wanted to ask you about global economic growth. We know that this is already having a huge impact on American farmers. These tariffs are already suffering here. What are we going to see in the near future?
It's very difficult to say. The different chairmen of the Feds and central banks have been meeting recently, and they are very concerned about this. We've been, since the financial crisis, in this kind of cheap money with all this different availability of cash and low interest rate. And we are not expecting to see a major change because they look at the way the United States is conducting business when it comes to trade policies and other policies, and they feel that could have an impact on global growth. And when we look at the European Union as well, it is starting to pick up. But if now we're moving towards a more substantial trade dispute between the US and the EU, which represent 1/3 of the global economy and over 15 million jobs, this could have tremendous consequences in the near term and long term.
Maxime Larive, thank you so much for joining us from Miami.